A poor girl scratched a millionaire's luxury car. His reaction was unbelievable. Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. New York, the city that never sleeps. The towering skyscrapers stood tall against the night sky, their neon lights reflecting on the rain-slicked streets. The air carried a mix of gasoline, cigarette smoke, and the faint aroma of coffee from a nearby street cart. Yellow taxis sped through intersections. Businessmen in tailored suits hurried out of office buildings. A lone figure leaned against a lamppost, taking a slow drag of his cigarette, watching the city move. Screech! A sharp, piercing sound cut through the hum of the city, metal scraping against metal. A long, jagged scratch now ran across the flawless silver paint of an Aston Martin, gleaming under the streetlights. The world seemed to pause for a moment. Holy hell! Who in their right mind would mess with that car? A well-dressed man murmured to his friend. That thing costs as much as a luxury penthouse in Manhattan. Another replied in shock. But who was responsible for this? Ethan Caldwell, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and ruthless ambition. He wasn't just rich. He was a force to be reckoned with in the financial world. A self-made CEO running a multinational investment firm, overseeing dozens of subsidiary companies. A financial mastermind who could turn any deal into a money-making machine. He wasn't just a millionaire. He was a man who demanded absolute perfection. Everything he owned, his hand-tailored Italian suits, his six-figure Patek Philippe watch, his morning espresso brewed at the precise temperature, was a reflection of that perfection. And now, his car was scratched. Ethan narrowed his eyes. No one messed with his property. No one was foolish enough to even try. He calmly set his espresso down, his gaze sharp as a laser as it swept across the street. And then, he saw her. She wasn't like anyone Ethan had ever encountered. She didn't rush to apologize. She didn't try to run. Instead, she stood there, her hands gripping the handlebars of a beat-up old bicycle. The culprit behind the scratch. Her brown hair was hastily tied back, loose strands falling messily around her face. A faded denim jacket, slightly frayed at the elbows. Dark, form-fitting jeans, covered in dust from the city streets, and worn-out white sneakers, speckled with dried mud. But what caught Ethan's attention the most? Her eyes. A deep, smoky gray, sharp and unreadable. There was no fear in them. No regret. No desperate attempt to win his favor. Just a steady, unwavering gaze, as if she knew she had just made a mistake, but had no intention of begging for forgiveness. The street fell silent. People around them held their breath, waiting for Ethan's reaction. I didn't mean to. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was steady enough for him to hear. There was hesitation, but not an ounce of fear. A strange, unexpected calmness. Anyone else would have panicked. Anyone else would have fallen over themselves, apologizing profusely. But not her. Ethan remained silent, studying her closely. Who stays this calm after scratching a car worth more than most people's entire salary for a decade? His eyes flicked to her hands, gripping the bike just a little too tightly. A small sign of nerves. But no fear. Ethan tilted his head slightly, his expression cool but intrigued. Do you have any idea how much this car is worth? His voice was low, measured, like a test. She didn't blink. Do you have any idea how much joy a single pastry can bring someone? She countered, voice just as steady. For the first time in a long time, Ethan was speechless. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. New York, Caldwell Capital headquarters. High above the bustling streets of Manhattan, a sleek, glass-walled office sat on the top floor of a skyscraper. A minimalist space, polished black floors, a desk made of rare ebony wood, and a six-figure abstract painting hung in the center of the room. At the heart of it all stood Ethan Caldwell, a king surveying his empire, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, tailored to perfection. His silk tie knotted with meticulous precision, his Patek Philippe watch gleaming under the soft lighting. But his eyes, the eyes of a man always 3 steps ahead, held an unusual look today. The woman from last night was still in his head. A man like Ethan didn't entertain curiosity. His world was built on logic, efficiency, and control. But last night... Do you have any idea how much joy a single pastry can bring someone? Her words lingered, refusing to be ignored. For the first time, someone outside his world had made him pause and think. Lower East Side. Olive's Bakery. Just 10 blocks away from Ethan's towering headquarters was an entirely different world. There were no glass skyscrapers. No luxury cars lined the streets. Instead, there were narrow alleyways, small independent coffee shops, and a cozy little bakery tucked into a quiet street corner. Livia Moore, 26 years old, baker. She didn't belong to the world of high finance. Her brown hair was tied up in a loose bun, strands falling over her face, a flour-covered apron wrapped around her waist, hands kneading dough on a wooden counter. No designer brands, no expensive jewelry, just a quiet satisfaction in watching customers smile as they bit into something she had made. "Livia, your morning coffee's here." A coworker placed a steaming cup next to her. She wiped her hands on her apron, taking in the aroma with a contented sigh. She was happy. Most people didn't understand why she chose this life over chasing money. But to Livia, you don't need a fortune to be happy. Little did she know, one small accident on a New York street was about to pull her into an entirely different world. That morning, Caldwell Capital. Inside a sprawling conference room, Ethan sat at the head of a polished mahogany table, surrounded by executives and investors. On a giant screen, stock numbers flashed, signaling another successful deal. But Ethan wasn't paying attention. He was thinking about her. In his world, everything had a price. $1 billion investment could be secured with a single handshake. A date was just a selection from a pool of high-profile socialites eager to attach themselves to his success. But her? A single pastry can bring someone joy. Her words bothered him, and Ethan Caldwell wasn't the kind of man to ignore curiosity. When something got into his head, he pursued it. "Clear my schedule. I have somewhere to be." He grabbed his jacket and walked out. "Where are you going?" Lucas, his best friend and business partner, called after him. "To get answers," Ethan replied. For the first time, Ethan Caldwell was about to chase something that had nothing to do with wealth or power. His destination? A small bakery in the Lower East Side? Ted. One late evening, Ethan appeared at the bakery's doorstep. A light drizzle coated the city streets, turning the pavement into a shimmering mirror of lights. "Are you still open?" he asked, hands in his pockets. Livia glanced at the clock. "We're closing up soon." Instead of leaving, Ethan stepped inside, shrugging off his jacket and rolling up his sleeves. "Good. I want to learn how to bake." Livia let out a small laugh. "You're joking." "I'm serious." He met her gaze with unwavering confidence. And so, for the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell attempted to bake. He was a disaster. Flour was everywhere. He nearly sliced his own finger trying to chop apples. Livia had to grab his hands to show him how to knead the dough properly. When her fingers brushed against his skin, both of them froze. What was that? Something between them had shifted. 1 week later, Ethan's name was on the front page of a tabloid. Millionaire Ethan Caldwell and a bakery girl? The article mocked their connection. It painted Livia as a gold digger. It hinted that she was using him. When Ethan read the headline, his face darkened. He had dealt with the media before. But this time, it wasn't just a game. It was hurting Livia. Her call came that afternoon. "We need to talk." Ethan drove straight to the bakery. Livia stood at the entrance, gripping the newspaper, her expression unreadable. "I don't want to be a joke, Ethan." For the first time, Ethan felt something he had never felt before. Fear. Not fear of the media, not fear of a bad business deal, but fear of losing her. "They don't know anything about you," he tried to reason. "Neither do you," she whispered. For the first time, Ethan realized that to keep her, he might have to change. Lower East Side. Olive's Bakery. Every morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the towering skyscrapers of New York, a small corner of Lower East Side came alive with the sweet scent of flour, melting butter, and a hint of cinnamon. The Olive's Bakery wasn't a flashy, high-end cafe. It didn't have marble floors or crystal chandeliers, but it had something that few places in the city could offer: warmth. The wooden tables were slightly worn from years of use. The brick walls were covered with Polaroid photos of smiling customers and handwritten notes pinned to a message board. A place that felt like home, even to strangers. Behind the counter, Livia Moore worked with practiced ease. "Is the morning croissant batch ready yet?" one of her co-workers asked while packing orders. "Just a few more minutes," Livia replied, as she brushed an egg wash over a row of golden pastries. She was focused on her task when suddenly, the bell above the door chimed. For some reason, the entire atmosphere of the bakery shifted. A tall figure stepped inside, scanning the space with calm intensity, as if assessing everything at once. Ethan Caldwell. He wasn't wearing a designer suit today. This time he wore a crisp white dress shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, paired with tailored dark trousers. Even in something so simple, he looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a small neighborhood bakery. "What the hell is he doing here?" Livia stole a glance at him as she arranged the display. Ethan moved with deliberate ease, unbothered by the odd glances he received. He approached the counter, his gaze meeting hers. "I'll have an espresso." His voice was smooth and firm, like it belonged in a negotiation rather than a coffee order. Livia raised an eyebrow. "Really? I thought guys like you only drank coffee in places where the chairs are leather and the waiters wear tuxedos." A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Maybe I'm trying something different." The following days, Ethan started showing up, 6:30 a.m. When high-end cafes in Midtown were just opening, Ethan was already seated at Olive's Bakery. He always chose the window seat. He didn't rush. He just observed. He ordered the same thing: a strong espresso, no sugar. At first, Livia ignored him. But as the days passed, it became harder to pretend he wasn't there. Whenever she looked up, their eyes met. Ethan wasn't like the men she had met before. He didn't flirt. He didn't try to impress her. He simply watched her, intrigued. "What are you doing?" One morning, Livia couldn't help but ask. Ethan set his newspaper down and met her gaze. "Drinking coffee?" She crossed her arms. Why do you keep coming here?" He exhaled, tilting his head slightly. "Maybe I'm trying to understand how a tiny bakery can make someone happier than a six-figure car." Was it a challenge? A joke? Or was he genuinely curious? Livia wasn't sure. But one thing was clear. Ethan Caldwell wasn't just here for a cup of coffee. The warm glow of the bakery's lights flickered against the glass windows, standing in contrast to the cool, dark streets of New York outside. Inside, the rich aroma of vanilla, cinnamon, and fresh dough filled the air. But for Ethan Caldwell, this place was entirely unfamiliar. He stood in the middle of the small bakery kitchen, sleeves rolled up, an unusual sight for a man who was always impeccably dressed for business. His world of high-stakes deals and corporate strategy had been replaced by a countertop dusted in flour. Livia leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a teasing glint in her smoky gray eyes. "You ever actually made something with your own 2 hands?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, not out of offense, but because he genuinely had no answer. His life had always been about delegation. He paid people to handle everything for him, from cooking to scheduling his time down to the minute. "I manage a billion-dollar company," he finally replied. "I don't exactly have time for baking." Livia smirked. "That's what I thought. So, let's fix that." She grabbed a bowl and placed it in front of him. "Tonight, Mr. Millionaire, you're going to learn how to make a simple loaf of bread." Ethan stood stiffly in front of the counter, eyeing the ingredients as if they were a foreign language. "This is a terrible idea," he muttered. Livia tied her apron, grinning. "Relax, it's just flour and water. You won't die." She poured flour onto the wooden surface, forming a small well in the center before adding the yeast mixture. Her hands moved effortlessly, years of experience evident in every smooth motion. Ethan, on the other hand, was completely lost. He poured too much flour. His dough was a sticky, lumpy mess. When he tried kneading it, it clung to his fingers like glue. "For the love of... why won't it just work?" he muttered under his breath, growing frustrated. Livia laughed. "You're treating it like a business deal. Dough isn't about control, Ethan." She moved behind him, placing her hands over his, guiding his fingers. The moment her skin touched his, something shifted. Her hands were small but firm, warm, steady. Ethan felt his breath hitch for just a second. The world outside the bakery felt distant, as if nothing else mattered in that moment. "See?" Livia murmured. "It's about patience. You have to let the dough tell you when it's ready." Ethan wasn't sure if they were still talking about baking anymore. After nearly an hour of struggling, Ethan finally had something that resembled dough, at least vaguely. Livia wiped her hands on a towel, inspecting his work. Not bad, for a first-timer. Ethan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't think I've ever worked this hard for something that wasn't worth millions." "Some things are worth more than money," Livia said simply. He had no reply to that. Just as Ethan was about to respond, Livia reached for a bag of flour on the counter and accidentally knocked it over. A cloud of white exploded into the air, coating both of them in a fine dusting of flour. Ethan froze, his jet-black hair now speckled with white. Livia's eyes widened. She gasped, covering her mouth. And then, she started laughing. Ethan stared at her for a second, then, unexpectedly, he laughed too. Not a polite chuckle, not a carefully measured reaction, a real, genuine, full-bodied laugh. It felt foreign to him. Strange. Yet, right. Livia wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, trying to catch her breath. Okay, I'll admit. You look kind of cute, covered in flour." Ethan shook his head as he dusted off his shirt. "You're lucky I don't fire people outside of business hours." "Oh, please," Livia rolled her eyes. "Like you could handle running a bakery without me." He didn't answer. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about work. He wasn't thinking about money, or power, or what came next. He was just here, in this tiny bakery, with this infuriatingly fascinating woman, laughing about something completely meaningless. And for the first time, Ethan Caldwell wondered if this was what life was supposed to feel like. The morning air was crisp, but inside Olive's bakery, the warmth of the ovens fought against the autumn chill. The usual scent of fresh bread and cinnamon swirled through the air, mingling with the sound of soft chatter from early customers. Livia moved through the small space behind the counter, rolling out dough with practiced ease. It was just another morning, or at least it was supposed to be. Then, the door to the bakery swung open, faster than usual. A man entered, out of breath, gripping a newspaper in his hand. One of the regulars, an older gentleman who often came in for a black coffee and a croissant. Livia. He hesitated, holding out the paper. You might want to see this. She wiped her hands on her apron before taking the paper. The second she saw the bold headline, her stomach dropped. Millionaire Ethan Caldwell and a bakery girl? Below the headline was a photograph of her and Ethan, taken from a distance. It was from a few nights ago. Ethan walking her home, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. The article was worse than she imagined. They called her a gold digger, a nobody trying to climb the social ladder. The article speculated about how long it would take before Ethan came to his senses and left her behind. The paper felt heavy in her hands. Livia's chest tightened. She knew dating someone like Ethan would come with complications. But this was humiliating. She folded the newspaper and set it aside, ignoring the glances from customers who had begun to take notice. Then, the door opened again. Ethan. He was dressed in his usual sharp, perfectly tailored suit. But there was something off about him today. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was tense, controlled. Their eyes met. Livia didn't say a word. She simply turned, walked toward the back of the bakery, and pushed through the swinging door into the kitchen. Ethan followed. The moment the door shut behind them, Livia spun to face him. "Tell me you've seen it," she said, her voice strained. Ethan nodded. "I have." She crossed her arms, exhaling sharply. And what?" His voice was steady, too steady. "It's just gossip, Livia. They don't know anything about you." She let out a bitter laugh. "It's easy for you to say that. You're used to this. I'm not." Ethan took a slow breath. He had expected her to be upset. What he hadn't expected was the way it twisted something inside him, an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. "They don't matter," he said finally. People like that? Livia cut him off. "You mean people who don't belong in your world?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" A silence stretched between them. Livia swallowed, shaking her head. "I don't want to be a joke, Ethan. I don't want to be some scandalous headline for people to whisper about." Ethan took a step closer. "You're not." "Then why does it feel like I am?" She stared at him, searching his face, waiting for him to have an answer. For the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell didn't know what to say. He could negotiate billion-dollar deals. He could predict market trends before they happened. But this? This was something completely outside of his control, and Livia could see it. She exhaled slowly, her voice softer now. I don't know if I can do this." Ethan's entire body tensed. "You don't mean that?" She hesitated. "I don't know what I mean anymore." Ethan reached for her hand, but this time, Livia took a step back. Something in his chest cracked at the small but undeniable movement. Livia turned toward the door, gripping the handle. "I need some time, Ethan." Then, without another word, she walked away. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell knew what it felt like to lose something that truly mattered. That evening, Ethan sat in his penthouse, the city sprawled out beneath him. He had built a life of luxury, power, and absolute control. But now, none of it mattered. The glass of whiskey in his hand was untouched. The muted hum of the city below felt more distant than ever. He had always believed that money could fix anything. This time, he wasn't so sure. Ethan Caldwell had never been afraid of losing. But as he sat there, staring out at the New York skyline, he realized something. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing her, and he had no idea how to stop it. The scandal wasn't fading. It was spreading like wildfire. The news cycle churned out new headlines daily, each one more vicious than the last. Billionaire falls for the help, a romance, or a PR stunt? Ethan Caldwell's latest distraction, a small-town baker? How long until he moves on? The media frenzy was relentless, dissecting every aspect of their relationship, turning Livia from an unknown baker into a tabloid obsession overnight. But it wasn't just the press. His business associates, investors, and even his closest friends had something to say. You need to end this, Ethan. Lucas Sterling, his oldest friend, and the closest thing he had to a brother, was sitting across from him in a private lounge, nursing a scotch. His expression was unreadable, but his tone was firm. You know how this works, Lucas continued. Your reputation isn't just yours. It's tied to your company, your investors, your future, and right now, you're making a mistake. Ethan set his glass down carefully, leveling his friend with a cool stare. Define mistake. Lucas sighed, exasperated. You're putting your entire legacy on the line for a woman who— Finish that sentence, Ethan cut in, voice sharp as glass. Lucas hesitated before choosing his words. She's not from our world, Ethan. And no matter how much you want to believe otherwise, the world is watching. You can't change how people see this. Ethan's grip tightened around his glass. He had built his life on control, calculated decisions, and an unshakable public image. But this was personal. I don't care what they think. Lucas laughed dryly. You always care what they think. Ethan didn't answer, because for the first time, maybe he didn't. Livia had done everything she could to ignore the headlines, the whispers, the looks she now got from customers who came to the bakery not for pastries, but to catch a glimpse of the woman Ethan Caldwell was wasting his time on. But the worst part wasn't the strangers. It was Ethan. Because despite everything he had said, despite his promises that none of this mattered, he had been distant. Their conversations had become shorter, their moments together strained. And maybe it wasn't intentional. Maybe he was just overwhelmed, caught between his world and hers. But that didn't change the fact that Livia could feel him slipping away. So when he finally showed up at the bakery one evening, soaking wet from the rain, eyes dark with something she couldn't quite place, she wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or exhausted. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway, breathing heavily, like he had run all the way there. Livia wiped her hands on her apron, waiting. Finally, he spoke. If I walk away from this, from us, just because of a few headlines, then I don't deserve you. His voice was rough, raw in a way she had never heard before. Livia swallowed, looking at him carefully. The old Ethan Caldwell, the one she had met that night on the street, the one with the sharp suit and controlled expressions. He wasn't standing in front of her right now. This Ethan? He looked lost. And maybe that was worse than anything else. Ethan, she started, softer now. I never asked you to choose between me and your world. But they are. She sighed, shaking her head. It shouldn't be this hard. But it is. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rain tapping against the glass windows. Finally, Livia spoke again, barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can do this anymore. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're saying you want to walk away? I'm saying I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've worked for. He took a step forward, eyes locked onto hers. "You are not a liability, Livia." "You might believe that, but do they?" He didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. The rain had slowed, turning into a quiet drizzle by the time Livia walked him to the door. Neither of them said it, but the weight of the moment was heavy, thick with unsaid words and unspoken fears. Ethan hesitated, standing just outside the bakery. "I'm not giving up on us," he said. Livia forced a small smile. "I know." But the look in her eyes told him what she wouldn't say aloud. Sometimes, love isn't enough. Then, before she could change her mind, she gently shut the door. Ethan stood there for a moment, staring at the wood, before finally turning away. He had walked away from million-dollar deals without a second thought. But walking away from her? It felt like losing something he could never replace. The invitation came unexpectedly, a formal dinner at the Caldwell estate. Livia stared at the crisp white envelope in her hands, the gold lettering embossed with the Caldwell family crest. The address, an Upper East Side mansion that looked more like a museum than a home, felt like another world entirely. She knew what this was. It wasn't an invitation. It was a test. Ethan stood beside her, watching her reaction carefully. "You don't have to go." She exhaled slowly, fingers tightening around the envelope. "Yes, I do." The Caldwell estate was breathtaking. A towering mansion surrounded by pristine hedges, its grand entrance guarded by stone pillars and an iron gate that whispered of old money and untouchable power. Livia felt the weight of every step as she followed Ethan up the marble staircase, past gold-framed oil paintings of ancestors who had built an empire long before Ethan had ever held the reins. She had never been nervous before. Not when she scratched his car. Not when the tabloids called her a gold digger. But this? This was different. The moment they entered the dining room, all conversation ceased. Eleanor Caldwell sat at the head of the table, a glass of red wine resting between her fingers. She was a striking woman, elegant yet intimidating, her silver hair perfectly styled, her sharp blue eyes assessing Livia before she even had a chance to speak. To Eleanor, Livia was already an answer to a question that didn't need to be asked. She didn't belong here, and she never would. Dinner was exquisite, a 7-course meal served on china that probably cost more than Livia's entire apartment. But the atmosphere? It was ice cold. Eleanor barely spoke to Livia, only occasionally acknowledging her with subtle glances and a perfectly measured smile that didn't reach her eyes. The only sound was the clinking of silverware against porcelain and the occasional murmured conversation from Ethan's father and a few distant relatives, none of whom seemed particularly interested in her presence. Finally, Eleanor placed her wineglass down with a deliberate motion. "Livia," she said smoothly, her voice calm but carrying the weight of the room. "Tell me, what is it you do?" Livia set her fork down, wiping her hands on the napkin in her lap. She knew exactly what this was, a carefully disguised challenge. "I run a bakery," she said simply. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her lips curving in something that wasn't quite a smile. "How lovely. And is that what you always imagined for yourself?" Livia met her gaze, unwavering. "It's what I love." "And that's enough?" Eleanor tilted her head slightly, studying her like an object under a microscope. "To build a life? To stand beside someone like Ethan?" A silence stretched across the table. Ethan's grip on his wineglass tightened. "Mother—" But Livia lifted a hand slightly, stopping him before he could intervene. She turned fully toward Eleanor. "I didn't come here to impress you, Mrs. Caldwell." Her voice was calm, steady. "I didn't come here to prove that I'm worthy of Ethan." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. "I'm here because I love him, Livia continued. Not his money, not his name. Just him. A long silence. Eleanor tapped a single manicured finger against the stem of her wine glass, as if considering her next words. Then she stood. The conversation was over, and Livia understood. She would never be enough. Not for this family, not for Eleanor. But as Ethan reached under the table, taking her hand in his, squeezing it tightly, she knew she was enough for him. And that was all that mattered. The car ride home was silent. Ethan stared out the window, his expression unreadable. Livia exhaled, rubbing her arms as if shaking off the weight of the evening. I don't think she likes me, she said finally, trying to make light of the situation. Ethan didn't smile. She doesn't matter, he said. You matter. Livia glanced at him. She's your mother, Ethan. She'll always matter. He turned to her then, something raw in his gaze. Not more than you. And in that moment, she knew. He wasn't going to let her go, no matter what it cost him. It was late. The city had settled into a quiet hum, the usual chaos of New York simmering into a softer, more intimate version of itself. Streetlights flickered, their glow reflecting off the rain-slicked pavement, and the scent of wet asphalt mixed with the lingering warmth of fresh bread from inside Olive's bakery. Inside, Livia was closing up for the night. She wiped down the counters, humming softly to herself, the scent of cinnamon and vanilla still clinging to the air. The shop was empty except for her, just the way she liked it at the end of a long day. Then, the bell above the door chimed. She glanced up, expecting to see a last-minute customer. But it was him. Ethan. Standing in the doorway, slightly out of breath, his expensive suit damp from the rain. And in his hands, a small black box. Livia's heart stilled. She set down the towel she was holding, wiping her hands on her apron as she watched him step inside. You're here late, she said, trying to keep her voice light. Ethan didn't respond right away. He just stood there, watching her the way someone looks at something they're afraid to lose. Then, slowly, he walked toward her, stopping just a few feet away. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, Livia, he said quietly. But walking away from you won't be one of them. Livia swallowed, her chest tightening. Ethan. But he wasn't finished. Without hesitation, Ethan dropped to one knee. Livia's breath caught. Her mind spun in a million different directions. Was this a proposal? Was he actually? But then Ethan opened the box, and inside wasn't a diamond ring. It was a key, a single silver key, resting on the velvet lining. Confusion flickered across Livia's face. She looked up, meeting Ethan's gaze, searching for an answer. I've never knelt for anyone before, he admitted, voice steady but filled with emotion. But tonight, I'm doing it for you. Livia felt her throat tighten, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. This isn't a proposal, Ethan continued. Not yet. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I'm not asking you to marry me, he clarified. I'm asking you to build something with me. Not for me, not for you. For us. He took a breath, the intensity in his blue eyes never wavering. Let's open a bakery together. The words hit her like a slow, rolling wave, warmth spreading through her chest. Not just yours, not just mine, ours, he said. A place where you can do what you love, without worrying about what anyone else thinks. A place where I can finally be more than just Ethan Caldwell, CEO. Silence hung between them, thick with unspoken emotions. Then, after a long beat, Livia let out a shaky, breathless laugh. She wiped at her eyes, surprised to find them wet. You want to go from investment firms to rolling dough? She teased, her voice breaking just slightly. Ethan chuckled, his lips curving into something soft, something real. I figure if I'm terrible at it, at least I'll have the best teacher. Livia stared at him. This man who had walked into her life by accident, but stayed by choice. The man who had fought against his own world to stand by her side. She could feel her heart racing, could feel the weight of everything pressing down on her, his love, his devotion, his belief in them. Then, finally, she stepped forward and took the key from his hand. The moment she did, Ethan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for days. Livia shook her head, still laughing through her tears. "You're insane," she whispered. Ethan smirked. "But you're saying yes?" She curled her fingers around the key, looking down at it for a moment. Then, she met his gaze. "Yes." And just like that, everything changed. Ethan stood, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek, his fingers lingering just a second longer than necessary. Livia didn't move away. She just smiled, genuine and full of something he had never seen on her face before: hope. Outside, the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle. Inside, a future neither of them had planned for had just begun. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Caldwell wasn't thinking about profits or power or control. He was just thinking about her, and how somehow, against all odds, she had become the most valuable thing in his life. The transition wasn't easy. The tabloids had finally moved on to their next scandal. But Eleanor Caldwell had not. She tolerated Livia. Nothing more, nothing less. Dinners at the Caldwell estate were polite but distant. Eleanor would ask about the bakery in the same way one might inquire about the weather. A formality, not genuine curiosity. Livia felt it, but she didn't let it shake her. Ethan never forced his mother to accept her. Instead, he stood by Livia's side, choosing her every single time. "She'll come around," Ethan told her one evening as they walked home. Livia wasn't so sure. "Maybe," she said softly. "But does it matter?" Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "It matters if it bothers you." Livia exhaled, looking down at their intertwined hands. "It doesn't." She met his gaze. "Because I have you." And for Ethan, that was enough. Building something from the ground up wasn't as easy as throwing money at it. Caldwell and Moore Bakery was set to open in just a few months, but there was still so much to do. Ethan, for all his financial brilliance, was absolutely terrible at baking. Livia had tried to teach him, had even patiently walked him through the process of making a simple baguette. It had ended in disaster. "I don't understand," Ethan muttered, staring down at the rock-hard loaf in front of him. Livia tried very hard, not to laugh. "You killed it," she said, biting her lip. "I did everything right," Ethan argued, frowning at the burnt crust. "You needed the dough like it owed you money," Livia pointed out, "and you didn't let it rest. Dough needs patience." Ethan groaned, running a hand through his hair. "This is a disaster." Livia smirked. "Welcome to my world, millionaire." He looked at her then, shaking his head in mock defeat. But there was something else in his gaze. Something warm, something real. He wasn't just failing at baking. He was learning how to live. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Caldwell was happy, even if he was terrible in the kitchen. 1 year later, the grand opening of Caldwell and Moore Bakery was nothing like an exclusive corporate event. There were no red carpets, no reporters, no investors in tailored suits, just the smell of fresh bread, the sound of laughter, and a line of customers that stretched down the street. Livia stood behind the counter, moving effortlessly between the espresso machine and the display case, her hands steady, her smile genuine. The bakery was hers. No, it was theirs. At the back of the shop, Ethan was struggling. "How do you even use this?" he grumbled, staring at a piping bag filled with frosting. Livia turned, watching as he awkwardly squeezed a swirl of frosting onto a cupcake. It was not great. Ethan glanced up, waiting for her judgment. She tilted her head, pretending to be deep in thought. "You know what?" she said, grinning. "You should probably stick to investing." Ethan exhaled in relief, setting the piping bag down. "Finally something we can agree on." Livia laughed, shaking her head. "You're lucky you're cute," she teased. Ethan smirked. "That's what I've been told." And for a moment, standing there, covered in flour, watching the bakery they had built together fill with people who loved it just as much as they did, Ethan knew he had made the right choice, because in this little shop, with the woman he loved, the life he had never expected, and the scent of fresh bread in the air, he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Something real, something no amount of money could buy. As the day slowed down, Ethan leaned against the counter, watching Livia move through the bakery like she belonged there. Because she did, and so did he. Livia caught his stare and raised an eyebrow. "What?" Ethan shook his head, reaching for her hand and intertwining their fingers. "Nothing," he murmured. "Just thinking about how much I love you." Livia rolled her eyes playfully. "You're getting soft, Caldwell." Ethan smirked. "Only for you, Moore." And as they stood there, side by side, in the bakery they had built together, in the life they had chosen together, in a love that had defied every expectation, they smiled, because for once there was no more proving, no more running, no more fighting against the world. Just them. And that was more than enough. If you believe that love can overcome any obstacle, leave a comment below.